why did Chase go with Supercross setup over MX setup for SMX? Man, I don't think that's a good choice. I'm sure that I would have I would have to guess that most of those guys had some type of hybrid going on. The difficult part about every single track, actually, from what I recall for the playoffs, is that it was all very moto like, and then you had one rhythm section that was, first of all, really long, and also hard packed, and also really steep. Like, it appeared almost steeper than normal. So it just seemed like a weird mix. Like, why wouldn't you put in a rhythm section that's maybe a little bit more tame? So that way these guys, or even a whoop section that's just like a little bit more tame where you can skim it with moto suspension. Because a steep rhythm like that can get really hairy. So then these guys have to make a decision to find a compromise of a setup. I feel like it just adds danger, and it doesn't really add too much like for the viewer, right? I think that the first track and the last track, so what, Chicago and Vegas, the layouts looked pretty fun to watch on TV, but I just think that the rhythm sections were kind of unnecessary. If I were to choose, I would always choose the Moto setup over the Supercross setup, because the Supercross setup, most people don't have experience with it. It feels, and it can feel, and now the factory version, and I've ridden the Lawrence's bikes before with Supercross setups, the factory version does feel quite plush. The versions that I've had, what privateers have access to, or at least what I've had access to in the past, does not feel plush. They get the stiff feel by just like making it straight up stiff, and then it feels like riding on wooden boards. So I was watching those races, basically picturing myself having to deal with that on a Supercross setup, and I was just like, oh, thank God I own the Moto Academy and I don't have to worry about racing there, because it did not look fun. Now with a Moto setup, a good Moto setup, yeah, maybe a bit more fun, because you could actually get bite and get traction in some places. So if I were like one of their riding coaches, I would 100% try to steer somebody towards a softer setup always, even in Supercross. It's like compromise where you need to. Go with the softer stuff, because it's going to give you're going to be more comfortable, less arm pump, more feel in corners. Where you're going to lack a little bit is staying on top of whoops, but sometimes the softer setup eats up the whoops, which isn't a bad thing always, especially when they get really, really beat up. If you're super stiff, you're just deflecting off the tops and it just doesn't feel right. And then the big one is like the steep rhythm sections where with Moto suspension, you will G out so bad and compress so bad through the stroke that it creates this really, really harsh deflection, which actually pitches you sideways half the time. So it just feels like you're getting spat out into a barrel roll. It's a really uncomfortable, awkward feeling. I don't know if anybody here can relate to that, but like two jumps back to back where you go a little deep on the first one, all of a sudden you're just getting spat out of the second one. Just like, what the heck was that? Imagine a rhythm section where you're jumping 3 or 4 or 5 times in a row and getting that feeling. It's not great. Yeah, so that's interesting. I'd be very curious to just go down the line and hear who was running what. The other thing I'm super interested by is like, I'm pretty sure that Deegan was running a paddle tire at that last round. It was a completely hard packed track. Oh, I guess there was like 2 or maybe 3 turns that had sand. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. But clearly it worked. I'd have very little experience with that paddle tire. They've come out with like 15 different renditions of that thing since the last time I've even really ridden with one. So maybe it's just that good and that versatile, but man, insane to just, it seems kind of messed up and weird that they would, I don't know. Is it just to get the start? But then Deegan looks so freaking good on the bike. It's like you couldn't tell.
If you guys enjoyed this podcast clip and you want to listen to full episodes, you can do so on Spotify and Apple Music. If you want to send in your own video submission, you can join us in the Moto Academy family inside of the Moto Academy app by just going to themotoacademy.com. That's also where you can sign up for a class. Okay, guys, see you next episode.